Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the MASO leadership team, I would like to extend a warm welcome to each one of you to this academic session. MASO is a community-based professional association of social workers of Malayali descent in Ontario. The vast majority of our members are internationally educated social workers. As an organization, our fundamental obligation is to work relentlessly for the ongoing professional development of our members. MASO has conducted many academic sessions, workshops, interactive meetings, and training programs to enhance the knowledge and skills of our members since its inception. As is well known, the internationally educated social workers face several individual and structural barriers while attempting to be successful in their field in Canada during the initial years. Though the ethics, values, and principles of the social work profession are similar across the globe, the local context plays a pivotal role in defining how individual and social problems are viewed and addressed. Hence, understanding the context, structures, resources, practice frameworks, guiding principles, workplace terminologies, etc. are key to the success of a newcomer social worker. In other words, identifying and bridging the gap between what we have brought to this country in terms of knowledge and skills and what the industry demands here is crucial for us to effectively integrate into the professional landscape in Canada. This process requires deep critical reflections on our values, beliefs, and perspectives, and we often need to reset or reframe them in alignment with the local Canadian context. This is an ongoing struggle, not only for the newcomers, but also for those who have been in practice for years in Canada. As many of you have noticed, social work practice in Canada is changing rapidly in recent times. The old colonial Eurocentric methods are giving way to more progressive, equity-based and culturally appropriate approaches. Driven by the push for diversity, equity and inclusion, our workplaces are becoming more and more inclusive, creating more opportunities for equity-seeking, racialized community like ours. DEI has been progressively influencing HR practices in many human service organizations, especially in regards to hiring and promotions. These progressive changes have a direct bearing on the new cohort of immigrant social workers as they take less time to become employed in the sector, which was not the case a decade ago. We need to intentionally move out of our comfort zones, engage in building connections and increasing our visibility within our workplaces and outside to harness these opportunities. We all work in a highly competitive environment where creative networking, meaningful connections, and strategic visibilities and alliances are critically important for our career development. It is indeed a thoughtfully planned and carefully executed ongoing work. We need to strategically connect and market what we do within our workplaces and outside in the community. We have many members in our network who are aspiring for leadership roles within their organizations. MASO's vision is not only to train our members for entry-level jobs, but also to prepare them for leadership and managerial roles. We would like to see more social workers from our community in leadership roles in various fields of social work practice in the days to come. We have two reputed academicians with us today to equip us to deal with the above-mentioned challenges. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Purnima George. Dr. Purnima George is an associate professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University School of Social Work. She brings with her previous experience in community practice that focused on grassroots organizing and activism. Prior to her immigration to Canada, Purnima was a faculty member, academic lead, and coordinator of urban community initiatives at College of Social Work, Nirmala Niketan, Mumbai, India. In Toronto, she has channeled her passion for community practices and activism into community-based research on varied issues that impact racialized immigrants, especially South Asian communities. Emerging from the request of South Asian communities in the GTA, Purnima has focused her research on domestic violence in South Asian communities in the GTA. Her work in this area has recently expanded to interdisciplinary research collaboration geared towards advocacy for racialized immigrant women and children who are involved with the justice system. Purnima is a recipient of the Award for Racial Justice offered by the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians Toronto in 2015 and Sue Williams Excellence Enriching Award in 2018. Dr. Purnima, thank you so much for being with us for this academic session. Over to Dr. Purnima.
Good evening. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we have gathered. Acknowledging the land is an indigenous practice, and it recognizes and respects the legal and spiritual relationship indigenous peoples have with their territories. The region of Peel is a part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In particular, I acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe, Chippewa peoples, the land that's home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. As an uninvited guest on this land, I commit to being an ally of the indigenous communities in their struggle for sovereignty. And with that, I would like to begin my session. Respected Dr. Usha George, the Executive Committee of MASWO, and my fellow social workers, I'm honored to be a part of this prestigious professional and to share my learnings with all of you. Even though I have not had any practice experience in direct frontline practice in Canada, I draw on my practice experience as a researcher for this forum. Today, I'll focus on 3 points. Canada as a settler colonial and neo-colonial nation state, the foundations of social work practice in Canada, and the reframing of social work practice in the current context. So let's begin with Canada as a settler colonial and neo-colonial nation state. I decided to focus on the first 2 points of Canada as a settler colonial and neo-colonial state and the foundation of social work practice in Canada, because without this context of how the nation has come up as a nation and what was the origin of social work practice, we cannot reframe social work practice in Canadian context. So starting off with Canada as a settler colonial and neo-colonial nation state, that let's unpack the term settler colonial and settler. Settler colonialism is the process by which outsiders enter the country and appropriate not just the labor and resources, but most importantly, the land belonging to the original inhabitants or indigenous peoples. Settlers gradually but relentlessly replace local ways of governance by bringing new laws and implementing policies that operate on what Patrick Wolfe called the logic of elimination, which supports killing indigenous people to occupy their land and eliminate their cultural identity. Similarly, a settler is an individual who understands that they are on stolen land, land that belongs to indigenous peoples. They might wish to be the ally of indigenous peoples, but they do not take any action. As social justice advocates, settlers might advocate for equality of rights, but not equity, a position that takes a additional support than those given. Colonialism has been experienced by indigenous peoples in the case of Canada. The first settlers were from France, who made 3 voyages to Canada from 1534 to 1542 and followed their voyages with colonialism. The French found indigenous peoples culturally inferior, and in 1884, together with the churches, they implemented the Indian residential school system so that indigenous children could be made civilized. As a result, over 150,000 Indian, Inuit, and Métis children between the ages of 4 and 16 were sent to the Indian residential schools. And the Truth and Reconciliation Committee has reported on the physical, sexual, socio-emotional abuse these children have experienced and have called it as cultural genocide. Of course, we will never forget the recent excavation of graves of residential school children, which stands as an evidence of the physical genocide that these children experienced. As a part of the settler colonial process, settlers also bring people onto the seized indigenous land. In the Canadian context, after 1876, the French also brought black slaves with them to the provinces of Nova Scotia and Quebec. The area where blacks resided in Nova Scotia was named Africville. And Africville was denied basic community services such as electricity, clean water, or infrastructure, even though the black residents paid municipal taxes. Ultimately, in 1964, the Halifax City Council evicted resistant residents of Africville with little to no compensation or consultation. Followed by the French Canada. Canada also experienced settler colonialism from Britishers. Such settler colonial practices have not ended, but continue in current times. Hence, some scholars believe that we are living in a neo-colonial context in Canada. Colonialism has not ended. The neo-colonial trend is evident in the anti-indigenous and anti-black racism against these communities. Although residential schools closed in the 1990s, as per the 2016 census, 52% of children in foster care were indigenous, even though they made up only 7.7% of the population of children aged 0 to 14 years old in Canada. There is an overrepresentation of indigenous peoples in correctional services, and according to Stats Canada, in 2014-15, indigenous youth between the ages of 12 to 17 comprised only 7% of all adolescents in the general population. However, they constituted 35% of youth admitted to correctional services. A similar trend is also witnessed with regard to the overrepresentation of Black children in Ontario's child welfare services. A report published by Bonney et al. In 2018 reported that Black children represented 7% of the child population, but represented nearly 14% of the child welfare service population. Having seen the colonial and the neo-colonial trends in Canada, let's now move on to the foundations of social work practice in Canada. The foundation of Canadian social work was laid at the turn of the 20th century by British settler feminist women. As a part of the initiative, new institutions such as poorhouse, hospitals, and law enforcement were established. These institutions were structured around the practice of categorizing the vulnerable and the poor into the deserving and the undeserving by social workers who constituted white bourgeois settler women. They carried out social work as a benevolent activity through their church or a charity organization. So let me present below the perspectives of these bourgeois social workers that influenced the development of social services at that time. Indigenous people were considered culturally inferior and needed to be civilized. Chinese and Japanese immigrants were seen as a danger or a threat to the civilized white society. The focus of immigration programs was on the assimilation of newcomers. The white feminist movement on women's suffrage was linked with citizenship and support for the British imperial agenda. In doing so, the white feminist women erased the rights of indigenous peoples over the land and ignored the race and class-based struggles of Black women. The response to poverty was seen as character regeneration, as needing character regeneration. Social service programs such as creche were positioned to support only married women and children because unmarried or single mothers were seen as morally undeserving of services. The above details on social service programs highlights the influence of white hegemonic culture, the moralistic and anti-indigenous and anti-Black attitudes of the dominant group. Even though the designers were women with feminist orientation, they did not include any analysis of race and class as barriers and their influence on the poor and the marginalized of their time. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how are we positioned as racialized social workers within the current social work sector? As racialized workers, we work in organizations or institutions that are designed on the values of the dominant society and are expected to adapt to those values. Also, as we start work at the front line in these organizations, most often we have to work with managers and superiors who are from the dominant culture. And additionally, we might also have to deal with white service users who position us as racialized and hence inferior in our professional capacities. Research studies by Budwal and Gosain and Pond have pointed out the racism experienced by racialized social workers in social work practice settings. We need to find ways to navigate through successfully our understanding of social work practice and our role within it. So that brings me to the moot point of my this evening's presentation, and that is reframing social work practice in the current Canadian context. The work of reframing critical social work practices starts from analyzing the power structure as they implicate various marginalized populations we serve. How are they positioned within the existing socio-economic and political structures of our society? As social workers, we are often tasked with assessing risk in multiple contexts: child welfare, corrections, personal crisis, school failure, and employability. Most often, those affected are from racialized backgrounds: Indigenous, Black, or other racialized immigrants. EDI also is known as a practice that challenges various forms of isms, of racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, and anti-Muslim attitudes. I am not calling it as Islamophobia, but I'm calling it anti-Muslim attitudes based on the historical attitudes that prevailed against Muslims even before 9/11. And so, in the absence of a larger systemic and social change, EDI is the pathway that organizations have adopted to attend to issues of social exclusion. Therefore, implementing EDI policies now gives us the opportunity to redress the white settler, feminist, and racist foundation of the profession as well in Canadian context. So the question is, how can we achieve EDI in the context of implementation of our services? The process of achieving this is complicated, but not difficult. I am now going to break down this concept of EDI in relation to only one group of service users, that's Indigenous peoples, due to time constraint. However, this does not undermine the focus on other historically marginalized groups such as Black, those that are differently abled, and those who have diverse gender orientations. EDI begins with interrogating our own anti-Indigenous attitudes and prejudices towards Indigenous people. What opinion do we hold about them as people? What, in our opinion, are the reasons for the problems they might be facing or they are facing? And such an interrogation calls for transforming ourselves from being settlers to guests. What does this mean? It means moving from being a mere bystander towards racism directed at indigenous peoples and respectfully using our privilege as professionals to address their issues. We would also recognize and support the rights of indigenous peoples towards sovereignty and gaining land ownership. This transformation of our stance towards indigenous peoples is critical and foundational to all other advocacy work we might be engaged in, because any struggles for justice that are race-based with no reflection on the lives, lands, and sovereignty of indigenous peoples of the land we live on is ultimately a move that strengthens the settler state, which is also an empire and actively engaged in war and death-making in lands we as racialized immigrants come from. In other words, any social justice effort has to first start from our recognition and respect for the rights of indigenous communities to the ownership of land. In not recognizing their rights, we are further strengthening the agenda of the settler colonial state. South Asian complicity in white settler colonialism and anti-blackness has been challenged by scholar Shaista Patel in their article dated 2016, where they comment that, and I quote, "Solidarity with black people means nothing while standing on bodies of Dalits and other lower caste people. Just like for white people, making friends with black people does not erase their continually benefiting from slavery. For South Asians, talking about anti-blackness is empty if we do not understand that for us, that conversation must begin with caste and our place in it." This critique is significant and reflective of the important work we South Asian social workers need to do in relation to caste issues in our own country and indigenous and black communities in Canada. The third strategy of reframing social work practice is to move away from the Western hegemonic cultural approaches to service delivery to culturally appropriate or sensitive and holistic services. This is based on the rationale that most often our service users come from family-centric and collectivist cultures. The existing service delivery models based on the hegemony of white feminism center individualistic approaches to addressing issues, and those do not work for our service users. As against focusing only on one aspect, such as counseling for women who might have experienced domestic violence, it is important to recognize and offer support in other areas such as housing, education, legal, and supports to children that a woman might need. The fourth strategy of reframing social work practice is to acknowledge the historical trauma of colonialism and racism and its impact on our service user and provide trauma-informed services. The current approaches are based on deficit-centered model rather than accepting that racism, besides employment, also impacts physical and mental health of individuals, right? And hence, we need to recognize the necessity for trauma-informed approach, which focuses on recovery and healing as against labeling and treating individuals. Last but not least, let's address our own pressures we face based on our subject positioning as racialized professionals in the workplace. As we navigate through complex positioning as racialized workers in dominant organizations, as racialized frontline workers with white service users, and in our relations with white colleagues, we will need to build alliances with like-minded Indigenous, Black, and other racialized social workers to strengthen and broaden our base, which is an essential precondition for influencing any change. So to conclude, in this presentation, I've focused on three aspects: Canada's settler colonial past and neo-colonial present, and the complicity of social work with the colonial and neo-colonial agenda. Within this context, I also explored the possibilities of reframing social work practice based on a critical analysis of power structure at the societal and organizational level, focusing on EDI as a response and engaging in culturally trauma-informed and holistic practices. However, critical to this reframing is the call for a transformative change in our own perceptions and attitudes. So, as popularly said, let's be the change we want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Purnima George, for that profounding lecture on reframing social work practice in the Canadian context. It was such an honor and pleasure to be back in the room with Professor Purnima after such a long time. I had the privilege of being her student at TMU, formerly Ryerson University, in the social work program. Social work research can be a tough and dry subject, but professors' expertise and approach to the subject in qualitative and quantitative research has made it an immensely interesting learning experience. So thank you. So thank you, Professor, for sharing your knowledge about Canadian history and colonialization, Canada as a settled colonial and neo-colonial state, foundational social work practice in Canada, focus on white hegemonic culture, assimilation and promoting values of the dominant culture, and finally, reframing social work practice in the Canadian context. In this limited time frame, Dr. George has given us many crucial points to consider in our day-to-day practice, such as contextualizing our practice, importance of considering various forms of isms, and our responsibility as a social worker for social justice. Once again, thank you, Dr. Purnima George, for being here with us today and for sharing your insight and expertise. Next, it is my utmost privilege and pleasure to introduce our next honorable guest and speaker, Dr. Usha George, who is recognized for her expertise in newcomer settlement and integration. Dr. George is a professor in the School of Social Work at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson University, and the current academic director of the Ryerson Center for Immigration and Settlement. Dr. George is the former interim vice president of research and innovation and the dean of the Faculty of Community Services from 2006 to 2017. In 2015, she was awarded the Errol Aspavic Award for Outstanding Academic Leadership. She was also honored as the Professional Woman of the Year by the Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce in 2011, included in the shortlist for Top 25 Immigrants in Canada in 2012, and one of the 10 shortlisted candidates for the Paul Usick Award for Multiculturalism in 2012. Dr. George came to Ryerson in 2006 from the Faculty of Social Work at University of Toronto, where she had been the Associate Dean since 1999 and Royal Bank Chair in Applied Social Work Research. She is a past director of the Ontario Metropolis Centre of Excellence for Immigration and Settlement. Her main areas of teaching, research, and professional activity are social work with diverse communities and newcomer settlement and integration. She is well published and is often sought by the media for her views on immigration. Dr. George immigrated to Canada in 1990 and worked as the executive director of the then South Asian Family Support Services in Scarborough and the senior program director of Social Planning Council, Toronto. Dr. George has a PhD in sociology from Ahmadu Bello University, Nigeria, a MA in sociology from Loyola University in Chicago, a MA in sociology and social welfare, a BSc in chemistry, and a B.Ed from the University of Kerala. There is no doubt there is a more qualified person to talk to us about career advancement in the field of social work in Canada than Dr. Usha George. Regardless of where we are in our career journey in our respective fields, I believe Dr. George's expertise and wisdom will be a guiding light to those who are looking for ways to advance in their career. I am profoundly honored to welcome Dr. Usha George to share her expertise on career advancement in social work.
That's my favorite flower. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. എല്ലാവർക്കും സുഖം തന്നെയല്ലേ? Okay. Just when Purnima was talking about decentering social work, and when Alex was talking about how culturally sensitive we need to be, I'm just reminded of my first job in Canada. As it was said, in 1991, I was selected as the executive director of the South Asian Family Support Services, which was established by a person who experienced extreme experiences of domestic violence. So she said, this is going to be an organization that will support women who are abused in our communities. So the organization was a little bit fledgling, and as I started, was given 6 months to turn the organization around, funding-wise and service-wise and all the rest of it. So the main program we had was this domestic violence program. At that time, it was called Women Abuse Program. But whatever it is, the model that was employed at that time was, when the funder comes to review your progress, you are supposed to show how many files did you open and how many did you close. And by closing means you sent the victim to a shelter. Close the file, period. Yeah, then you move on to another person. I didn't know much about Canadian social work at that time, but my logic, my head tells me this is not appropriate. So I argued with the funder. I said, pardon me, I'm not an expert, I'm just new, but this does not go with our community's practice. Our women want the violence to stop. Our women want you the social worker to talk to their husbands. Our women do not want to have children without fathers. So with all of that, they were so reluctant, they said, okay, let us see how this works. I said, we won't be closing files soon. We won't be closing files in 6 months. We will have those as open. You can see our total client list, which, as Purnima suggested, it was not only about the abuse, and then how do we kind of settle you. Sometimes it is going the extra mile. I remember one person who was so insistent, she's moving out of a shelter, so we are trying to find her a small apartment, and she insisted that her apartment should have very broad windowsills because she wants her cat to sit on it. The cat can have, the view of the world outside. So that's kind of something to laugh at right now, but at that time she was dead serious. So it is our responsibility at that point to say, that's not quite going to work. We will try, but come with us. We may be able to satisfy many of your other demands. Anyway, so fast forward, as I was at University of Toronto, I was actually appointed as somebody who would lead their organizational change efforts to integrate more diversity into their operations. That included student recruitment, admissions, teaching, curriculum, faculty development, and research. And I remember I was asked by KINARC, Child and Family Services, I don't know whether you know that agency. At that time, they invited us me to say, suggest to us some of the changes we need to make so that we are more responsive to the very diverse group of people who are coming in. So we suggested a lot of things, and then one of the things that we said was, just look at your logo. What does it say? It shows, at that time, it showed a house, a man, a woman, and 2 kids. That's it. So I said, for families that are coming from different parts of the world, that is not something that would kind of register in their mind. They will not think that this is the place I want to go. So let us take out the boundaries that we put in here. Let us open it up a little bit. I remember that very well. Anyway, that has nothing to do with what I was asked to do today. So I am going to give you a very short and informal presentation. I was going to make it more of a dialogue, but I'm told that there's another time for it. So I was asked to talk about career advancement in social work. So as I'm saying this, I want to tell you 2 things. One, there may not be anything that I say that you don't know yet, right now. And whatever I'm saying can be applied not only for social work, but also for other professions as well. But now, since we are social workers sitting here, let us kind of examine some of that in the context of where we are. And the context of our practice is very well laid out by Purnima, and so I won't go into any of that. So I go directly to the very concept of career. Everybody knows the difference between occupation and a career. Occupation is something we get, something somebody gives us. A career is something we build, something we create for ourselves. A career involves ambition, desire. A career involves growth and development. So it's a string of work that you have performed over a long term. And it is something that you create. Some people say, I have dreams about becoming this. Some people say, I really want to be that. So it's a total progression of your professional life. That's a career. So in social work, of course, we all know that our education or our advancement does not stop with our degrees or just with our first job or a number of other jobs. It is a progressive advancement, having more responsibilities in the workplace so that you are rewarded, you feel that you are doing something good, something that you are challenging yourself. And as I said, it does not stop once you get your degree. And just like many other professions, social work is a lifelong learning experience that involves commitment, that involves continuous learning, seeking professional advancement, and opportunities for networking and other facilities. I'm going to talk about a couple of general points, and then I'll come to something specific. As I said, none of this is specific to social work because careers are careers, and how do you build them? The context is the only one that is different, and of course, as long as you learn how to manage the context, you'll be fine, or you'll keep going. That does not mean, I just want to kind of put in a word, that does not mean that all of us will end up in careers that we really want to. That is where the context becomes, becomes a factor. There is probably too much competition. There is probably predetermined outcomes in a search process. We are all familiar with all of those kinds of things. So let us try our best. So some of the general principles I want to talk about are some of my own favorites, so I'm kind of giving it to you. We are all busy. We are all running around. We are all trying to do things. And in that process, do we stop and see whether we did a good job of what we were doing? So, in other words, the principle that is involved there is from swiftness to completeness. So doing something swiftly does not mean that you are completely doing it well. So stop, think, and make sure that whatever task you are accomplishing, you are doing it well. There is a psychologist who actually got, I don't know whether he got a Nobel Prize, but his name is Thomas Kinahan. He wrote a book called Thinking Slow and Thinking Fast. He says that thinking fast is instinctive thinking. It is thinking that just comes to our head. On the other hand, thinking slow is deliberate thinking. You put facts in order, look at the pros and the cons, you come up with an idea and say, okay, this is what we want. So this is what we want to do. So in other words then, the deliberate thinking is something that we have to engage in ourselves. For example, most of our agencies have got strategic planning exercises. We don't come up with those plans in a day's time. We take time, we look at our strengths, we look at our deficiencies, our challenges, and we think of a way forward. So that's an example of a deliberate thinking. But instinctive thinking is one which comes just like that. Even though you get the impression that instinctive thinking is not necessarily that good, there is an argument for instinctive thinking as well. And instinctive thinking comes with experience with deliberate thinking. So you need to make sure that you engage enough in deliberate thinking, accumulate enough experience so that you are able to say this. That is the difference between a very a senior heart surgeon and a new one, and a totally new one who is coming into the field. Their experience will tell them, okay, this is what the right procedure needs to be. So from swiftness, that is from our speedy thinking to our complete thinking. Now, each one of them is important, but the important fact is that the cardinal fact is that we will make sure that the thinking is done in a way that advances our cause, that provides the best outcome, and that is what we need to do. My second principle is from distraction to focus. We are all experts in multitasking. I would argue that sometimes multitasking is given too much credit. I myself do it. As I'm sitting on my computer doing something, I'll say, oh God, I didn't do that. Then I go there. Then I say, oh my God, I have to make a list of things to do. We keep running around like that. So, we get distracted. At the same time, if you don't want your results to be all over the place. You have to have focus. So my second principle is from distraction to focus. Focus on what you are doing right now. There could be so many other things that will demand your attention. Particularly, I remember in the earlier days when I sit at home to work, Fridays I used to sit at home to write articles and so on. All of a sudden say, oh my God, I didn't cook rice for the evening, or I didn't do this for the evening, so I get up and run around. So we are multitasking, and then of course I lose my concentration and my thinking around the article I'm trying to write. So let us not give too much credit for multitasking. All I'm saying is that is too distracting. We can do small amounts of multitasking, but the focus part is extremely important. There's a writer called Eckhart Tolle. I understand that he lives in British Columbia. He has written a number of books. The most popular one, most famous one, is the one called The Power of Now. I don't know whether any one of you have read that. So Tolle says that what we need to do is to focus on now. What are you doing now? So he argues that any minute that you spend thinking about the past, any minute that you're thinking too much about your future is a waste. Focus on now. So don't be overwhelmed by all the stuff we need to do, but what is the task at hand? Focus on it right now. Then I have another principle that I state usually as from imitation to authenticity. I'm sure you all know what is authenticity. Being true to your own personality, values, and spirit, regardless of the pressure to do otherwise. Be honest with yourself, own up your own mistakes, and take responsibility for those. And do not pretend we are something that we are not, just to please somebody else. I look at this situation and say, as immigrants to a country, as newcomers to a particular situation, as a new worker in an organization, we may have the tendency to kind of fake it, to say, oh, I was this, I was that, and I'm doing this, that, and the other. But learn what is to be learned about the culture of the place. At the same time, be your authentic self. None of us need to say that I am a person from United States, I was born to white parents. We can't claim that, and don't claim that. So we need to say, this is my authentic self. I have certain values, and certain values I keep on learning. We also make sure that whatever some of the bad thinking that we have, we get rid of them. So be ourselves, strengthen ourselves, have self-confidence, and then have a sense of your own self. You know, the fact that some of us are very good at qualitative research does not take away from the fact that some of us are bad at quantitative research. So what's our strength? Keep that growing. And of course, learn new things as you go along. My final general principle is from competition to cooperation. Of course, Malayalis are well known for our competition, competitive spirit. I don't know, young people here may not know the story of the crab in a basket in Kerala. I'm sure you know that. Do you? Don't want to repeat that. There's a story about a whole lot of crabs were put into a basket, and each crab is trying to get out of the basket, and then the crab that is coming after them is trying to pull him down, not necessarily knowingly, but he's trying to get ahead of the other one, which is actually up there. So that's probably not a great example, but the whole point is that particularly in workplaces of these times, cooperation and teamwork. When we write our resumes, we always write about we are good at teamwork. I am motivated, I am an achiever, I do this, that, and the other, but I am also a team worker. So one of the deliberate thinking that hiring managers particularly do is, can I get this person to work in a team in our organization? Is this person a team player? They give you scenarios. So from there, they'll try to understand what is your style of work. I had always resisted throughout my work. I don't know, maybe it's a good thing or a bad thing. I like my office to be open, at least half open. I just want to make sure that people who want to talk to me, or I can go out and see people, the impression that I'm a closed workplace, I'm closed to the outside world, somehow I don't like it. So in that way, we kind of remain open to teamwork and effective teamwork. Of course, there'll be frustrations on the way. People who have done your coursework, for example, in different, when you're asked to do a group work, we are asked to do a group assignment, there are people who slack off. Don't worry about them. Put in your best and make sure that you bring people along to say, okay, can you do this, can you do that? So we can take them along. So modern workplaces are not necessarily built on competition. They are built on cooperation. So that kind of sums up my general principles. But underlying all of this are what we also call soft skills. I'm sure all of you know what are soft skills. It is creative thinking, it is communication, it's adaptability, curiosity, emotional intelligence, and as I said, authenticity. In addition to that, there is also what is called a generosity of spirit. That is one of my favorite things. The broader definition of generosity of spirit is that you acknowledge other people, you help others, you share your gift generously. Gift does not have to be, material goods. It is probably your ability to help, your ability to say a nice word, an ability to calm somebody, ability to congratulate someone. So that generosity of spirit should be part of our being. If we really don't have that, particularly I always remember about people who do not recognize what is important for someone. I remember a long time ago, this is when I was at University of Toronto, my mother died. So I had to rush out of the faculty, go home, come back. And most of the faculty members came to me and said, I must be so sorry, this is part of what we do. There are a couple of them who heard that and just turned around and went away. And I thought to myself, these are social workers. These are people who are supposed to share. They are people who are supposed to express, and people who are supposed to understand what is important for the other person. And celebrating another person is equally important. That's all part of the generosity of spirit notion. I'm sure in every workplace this is a thing. Somebody gets a promotion. The fact that you didn't get it should not deter you from saying, congratulations, you'll do very well, I'm sure you deserve it. In our university context, the congratulations come when you get a promotion from assistant to associate professor, when you get a new research grant. We always say, congratulations. This is all because we are trying to demonstrate that there is a generosity of spirit that celebrates what is important for the other person. Okay, coming to social work. And again, I'm not saying anything that you don't know. One of the things is how do you move up the ladder? Someone told me that she has been at the same work for like 25 years. If you like it, it's okay. But for people who would like to move up the ladder, what do you do? We are sometimes very comfortable with what we do. I remember the family violence counselor who worked with me in 1991 at the South Asian Family Support Services at that time, is still there doing the same work. Doing the same work. So she tells me she has burnout, she has this, that, and the other. And I said, but what stops you from moving? And she said, I can't do that. And I think of all these people who are asking me for help, I can't do that. That's fine. But the thing is to push yourself, to kind of move yourself forward if you want to move up the ladder. Dedication and hard work. We don't have to have a new principle for that one. Now, go the extra mile and take more responsibility. That is very common in our workplaces. Who is going to do this? Who is going to do the strategic planning, or who is going to do the outcomes, or whatever it is? This is probably not in your job description. But going the extra mile is not only satisfying to you, but also your colleagues and your supervisors notice that. So that is where the trick comes. People then call you. Your supervisor can call you and say, there's a vacancy coming up, would you like to apply? They don't say that simply because you are there. It is because you have demonstrated leadership. Again, I'm not going to get into leadership and what it should do and all of that kind of stuff, but take more responsibility at your workplace and go the extra mile. I know we all would like to leave by 5 from our workplace, if it is that. I'm not saying we should be on 5, but if there is something that demands your attention, don't close your eyes and log off your computer. Get that done somehow and just move out. At least demonstrate that you have the passion for work. You're looking for outcomes. You want to genuinely help people, and that is the calling that you have. Now, get out of your comfort zone. Challenge yourself and think outside the box. I'm sure you'll have lots of opportunities. As I said, you should have lots of opportunities to kind of sit and do the same job over and over and over again. Occasionally try to challenge yourself and see, I have never tried this, but let me do this, or let me try this. And think of creative solutions to issues that we have. And as social workers, there is no dearth of problems that we can solve. So instead of having a very narrow vision of your work and as a process, keep an open eye, and challenge yourself. And my final point, which is one of my favorites, is to expand your network. And in sociology, social work, all of that, we call it social capital. I'm sure you've heard of that word, social capital. We have heard of human capital, economic capital, all of that. Now, what is social capital? It says that social relationships are resources that can lead to the development and achievement of human capital. When we say human capital, it's a better job for us. We become elevated to a particular position. We get a new job. We get connected. There are 3 types of social capital. One is called linking social capital, which is your relationship between you and the hierarchy in your office. I'm reminded immediately about how many of us, without making ourselves too visible and what do I say, too visible, make it a point to say good morning to our higher-ups when they are walking by, or have a little chat about how are you doing kind of thing. So how many of us link ourselves to the people above us in an organization? Make sure you do that. A lot of times we will think, he doesn't know me. They don't know me. But in an elevator, if you happen to be face-to-face one person, in the walkways, if you are doing that, or even in the office, you could say, good morning, I just want to say hi. That's it. People will notice. So that is the linking social capital. Now, is it me? Then we have what is called bonding social capital. This is the best example of bonding social capital. You are all come here because we all speak Malayalam. We are all from Kerala. We are all social workers. We bond with each other in order to understand each other's work and whatever possibilities there are. Somebody will say, oh, we have an opening for an executive director in our organization. You want to apply? These are the kinds of bonding that happens, and the bonding social capital is extremely important. And the third kind of social capital is bridging social capital. See, we are very good with bonding social capital. Actually, we have too many friends from our own communities. If we ask ourselves, how many people do we have as friends from outside our community? Many a times, there may be just 5, maybe at the most, or maybe none. This whole notion of social distancing, that is, how close are you with people from outside your community, your ethnic group, your in-group? Very few of us actually go out to cultivate those. Sometimes if you go to a general social work conference, you may have all kinds of people. Make sure you talk to them, that you introduce yourself to them, that you talk to them about their work and the work that you are doing. So create that level of awareness and friendship. And this also is a big asset which will help you in your job search. For example, there has been a lot of research. I mean, there are a number of researchers like Coleman, Purnima, you name it. There are lots of them who talked about social capital as a resource for human development, for in advancing your profession and getting better jobs. Now, I did a number of studies. I'll give one of my personal examples, then I did a number of studies. I did first, it's a personal example. My first job, as I said, was in the agency in Scarborough. There was a series of meetings that were happening in downtown Toronto, the city. They were looking at funding reallocation principles, all of that kind of stuff. So every executive director was invited to come to this. I had to cart myself all the way from Centenary Hospital all the way to downtown Toronto on public transit, and I went there regularly, attended all the meetings, provided some input, all of that. From that meeting, I get a call from the director of social services of the City of Toronto. She calls me and said, there is an opening at the Social Planning Council. I wanted to apply for that. So I asked her, why me? She said, oh, I can't explain all of that, but I kind of watched you, and I think you have the interest in moving forward. You show properties of leadership, this, that, and the other, and of course I fell for that. And I applied, and I got the job. So I was quite pleased. Of course, I had to go downtown every day. So in the Social Planning Council, we have all kinds of committees. As Purnima would know, she was also in the Social Planning Council. All kinds of committees, and many faculty members from University of Toronto's Faculty of Social Work attended those committees. I was barely there for 12 months, and one of the faculty members told me, we are searching for a faculty member for a faculty position for diversity, organizational change, all of that kind of stuff, and I think you should apply. I said, I don't want to apply for another job. I just want to die doing this job. He said, no, you have to apply. So the rest is history. I applied, I got a job, and then I actually went back to him and said, I got this job, but it's extremely challenging. I don't even know whether I can do it. And he said, are you kidding me? People will die for this job. Just go and do it. So the point is, it was all social capital. It was actually linking social capital. And then a number of my research projects actually looks at social capital as a resource for settlement. I've done a couple of studies on social capital itself. One, South Asian women and social capital. Two, Syrian refugees and social capital. And the third one was South Asian and Chinese women and social capital. They are all funded projects. I was quite curious because maybe things have changed, but the time when we were doing social work, and even now, South Asian women are seen as kind of feeble, wanting. They don't have the strength. They don't have the agency. Somebody has to kind of carry them along. And I thought to myself, no, that can be true. So I thought, how do women make use of social capital in order to advance their settlement? In fact, I found that just like men, or even better than men, women actually made connections, not only bonding, but also bridging and linking, and then they created new opportunities, not only for them, but also for their husbands. So, but they'll come home and say, do you know that agency is hiring new people? You go and apply. And pardon me, I'm one of all of us. There is a practice among us that men usually look for the best job to come by. They were managers and directors and all our supervisors in their respective jobs back home in Kerala. They are looking for something similar here to start off. You don't get anything like that. You have to start from somewhere which is lower, work your way up. So the women actually created the social capital. So I called it self-created social capital because they touched base with all kinds of people and they moved the settlement forward. And the same thing happened in the settlement of Syrian refugees as well. They connected with refugees who are around and then asked them, how did you come up, do this, that, and the other? And they all kind of said, work very well with we collaborate, we ask questions, we cooperate with our own people, and then we move out. So there's a whole lot of tradespeople who have come from Syria, carpenters and electricians and bricklayers and so on. They can't get into jobs here right away because they have to get accredited. So they kind of looked at people from the Syrian community who are doing these jobs, went there, found out what to do, and then they kind of did that. Because sometimes community agencies or settlement agencies do not give them the best advice because it is impossible to keep track of 150 different professions. So that social capital itself has been extremely useful for them. So, in summary, all I want to say is that even though most of the things I said here applies to every job that we know, particularly framing it for ourselves because our individual differences, framing it for ourselves in a way that makes sense for us, and looking for new opportunities and challenges, and breaking out of the boxes that we are all kind of, sitting in, would actually land us in a better position. And of course, one point I have to say, and I can leave it without saying it, which is mentors. They all say, oh, you have to have a mentor. There is nothing wrong if you don't have a mentor. My experience with mentors is not that great, but some mentors are really helpful, very, very helpful. Again, it is for you to assess and see which is better. Do I go with my mentor? Or do I identify one? Or, as I said before, a collaborator, a team player, maybe they are probably it. Okay, finally, you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. Can anybody tell me who said that? Winnie the Pooh in 2015. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really honored to stand here to thank Dr. Usha George. We really appreciate the time and effort you put into enlighten us during this historic gathering. We are truly grateful for wisdom you shared with us, inculcating your experience and expertise as an academician who excelled above and beyond. For an organization like MASO, it's such a memorable opportunity to see and listen to a professional like you on our stage. I'm confident that your session has invoked inspiration in the minds of many gathered here to further advance their social work careers to the next level, irrespective of their position and expertise in the field. You both, Dr. Usha and Dr. Purnima, are true inspirations and role models to the Indian and Malayali communities, and your accomplishments send a clear message to aspiring social workers and immigrants that there are no limits if you have the right passion, commitment, and attitude. On behalf of MASO Executive Committee and all members gathered here, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your participation and a wonderful presentation. As an expanding and growing organization, MASO is looking forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you very much, Dr. Usha. I would like to inform the members and the audience that if you have any questions regarding the presentation, please consult with Dr. Usha and Dr. Purnima during our networking session. And we have coffees and snacks arranged over their counter A and B. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful evening.